Fall Creek, the same way.
Yeah, that's not far from where I live.
There's somebody who's been to Valverde.
Ah, I'm having a little issue with the Facebook Live, so I'm just going to go ahead and record tonight's presentation. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. We're so glad to see you. I have a little bit of information to share with you, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Russell Kane for his presentation. We're so glad that you could join us tonight. Tonight's presentation is called From Missionaries to Visionaries, the historical story of Texas wines. I'm Christy Peliquin, the development manager for the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. We're so glad we've stopped by. We're so glad you stopped by, and we want to encourage you to get to know more about us. We are the nonprofit partner to the state agency, the Texas Historical Commission, and we help provide support for historic preservation efforts across the state. That could be supporting historic site improvements, or it might be supporting programming going on that the THC has in place. You can get involved and learn more about what we do by visiting our What We Do page on our website at thcfriends.org. I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you to those of you who made a donation in support of these events. We're so grateful for those, and please know $5, $10, it all matters to us. And so we just really want to thank you and thank you for being here. I also want to acknowledge our THC commissioners, our Friends board members, as well as some of our colleagues with the Texas Historical Commission who are here with us tonight. We are always happy to see you. If you haven't already, I want to encourage you to follow us on social media. We'd love to connect with you, but this is also how you can find out about future events and programming, like our upcoming event on August 8th called a Juneteenth Rodeo, a celebration of 1970s Black Western culture. This is going to be presented by author Sarah Bird. Some of y'all might recognize her name. A few housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's speaker and then turn it over to him. We would sure appreciate it if you could keep your microphones on mute. That just helps us focus on our presenter this evening. But we will be having Q&A after the presentation. So while the presentation's going on, please feel free to put questions into the chat. And as soon as his presentation concludes, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can before 7:30, which is when we have a hard stop. I also wanted to mention that tomorrow, everyone who's registered for tonight's event will get an email from me, and it will have a link to a recording of tonight's event, as well as some links to some resources that Dr. Kane might mention. So we'll share that with you, so keep an eye on your inbox. Okay, well, it's now my privilege to introduce our presenter for this evening. Dr. Russell Kane, aka Doc Russ Texas Wine Slinger. I love that. Dr. Russell Kane is an award-winning Texas writer, author, and wine aficionado with articles, tasting notes, and quotes that have appeared in local, regional, and national publications over the past 20 years. His best-selling book, The Wine Slinger Chronicles, Texas on the Vine, was released by Texas Tech Press in 2012. His second book, Texas Hill Country Wineries, was released in 2015 by Arcadia Publications. Dr. Kane, who has shared his time between Houston and the Texas Hill Country, has served as the executive director of the Wine Society of Texas, as a board member with the Texas Wine and Grape Growers Association, also known as TWGGA, and a member of the Texas Department of Agriculture's Wine Industry Development Advisory Council. He is a two-time awardee of the TWGGA Press Award for media coverage of the Texas wine industry. He has contributed articles for Edible Austin, Edible Houston, Edible Dallas Fort Worth, and for many years was a member of the Houston Chronicle tasting panel and provided wine recommendations in the Houston Chronicle. Please check out his blog at www.vintagetexas.com. And don't worry, I will drop a link to that into the chat. Dr. Kane is also the creator and instructor of two Specialists of Texas Wine certification courses, which are offered through the Texas Wine School. They are taught live statewide via Zoom, with wines provided to students for remote guided tastings during classes. We should have thought of that for tonight's virtual event. He is also a PhD and an experienced and awarded technical researcher and writer with over 300 technical publications. My goodness, Dr. Kane, you are an accomplished
I'm
person.
excited from writing.
We're so honored to have you with us tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And folks, I will see you in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen and come out on the other side. You notice how people always make up funny conversations when they're trying to share their screen. There you go. I think it popped up.
That looks great.
Good? Okay. Well, anyway, it's my pleasure. It's actually an honor to be here. When I've been writing these books and covering stories, I never really thought of myself much as a historian. But a matter of fact, the first book that I wrote for the publisher, Texas Tech University Press, they put that book up for a historical book series contribution. And I was just blown away at that point. But what I was told was the story I'm telling is historical. It's a lot of it that hasn't been written down before. But I also got to thinking that if I was teaching Burgundy or Bordeaux, I teach it much the same way because you have to understand the history, the geography, the culture. All this goes into making a wine region. And so what I'm going to do tonight is give you a little synopsis. These are bits and things that some of them come from the courses that I've put together. Some have been in publications. So sit back and enjoy. And we're basically going to try to, hold on one second. Let me find my cursor. There we go. We're going to discuss a few questions. And so I've decided to summarize those early here. And the first one is, where is Texas? Is it Old World? Is it New World? And I mean this not just from a location standpoint, but from a standpoint of what kind of wines it's making. Also, what is the genesis moment for a Texas wine? I'm going to ask you to go back in time a little bit. How did wine culture evolve in Texas? It just didn't pop up in 1976. It's been here a lot longer. What was one of Texas' major contributions to the wine world? I think if you're not familiar with this, it'll somewhat be a surprise. Who were the key players, particularly in the modern industry, that helped get this industry that we have now, which is the 5th largest wine producing state in the USA? Who some of those people are? What are the best grapes for Texas? And this is really interesting because we're going to talk about a new lexicon of winemaking grapes than you're probably familiar with. So let's look at the first one first. Let's look at the global perspective. And basically what we have here is the world. You notice the purple areas, those are the wine producing regions of the world. And they're all kind of crowded between two lines. One is the 50-degree Fahrenheit line, and the other is the 70-degree Fahrenheit line. And I have to explain, agricultural people, like a lot of other people who deal with geology and growing things, deal in average annual temperatures. So, what we're talking about here is you take the high and the low every day, you sum it up, divide by 2, and do that 365 times. So when I start talking, start talking about temperatures. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. Let's talk about what the old world is. And these are historical grape growing regions, winemaking areas of Europe for the most part. France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, Austria. So when we talk about New World, it literally is everything other than Old World. And we have, the West Coast, which is been where most of us learned to drink wine. They taught us how to drink wine in the US. California, Oregon, Washington, and even now down into Mexico. We have New York. We have down in South America, we have Argentina, Chile, Peru, Argentina. And then we look to South Africa. And now we even have stuff going on down here in Australia, New Zealand, and Tasmania, believe it or not. Now, where is Texas? Well, it's kind of on the southern edge of the northern hemisphere region where grapes are typically grown commercially. And you may have heard people talk about Champagne being on the ragged edge of the wine areas, primarily because of its northern exposure. Well, Texas has an equivalent position on the southern border, that range around 70 degrees Fahrenheit on average per year. And this does have an effect on the type of wines, the varieties of grapes that grow here. Okay, let's talk about another global perspective here. Most of you know that Texas is large, but it's hard to put it in perspective unless you see it with respect to other wine producing regions. And most everybody knows that France is a premium wine producing region. And as you see here, Texas is actually somewhat larger than France. And we have to keep that in mind. We're not just a little pocket where things grow. France has, dozens of wine regions that a lot of them produce different grapes and different style wines. So Texas is going to have a little bit different view of things. We do have something called AVAs, or American Viticultural Areas. These are sanctioned by the federal government. They have to go through a process to define them in terms of area and the history, the culture, what's grown there. Has there been any history of grape growing there? So anyway, if we look at these two maps together, Texas is larger than France. We've established that. We also have 8 AVAs, and we hopefully will have 2 more very shortly. They're going to be added to this yellow or this orange area in the middle around the hill country. The unique thing about Texas, it's pretty unique because we don't have too many regions that are like this, where most of our wineries are located, they're gathered in the hill country, which frankly looks like wine country. It may look like when you've been to Sonoma or Napa or Tuscany, maybe even down the Calf of Italy down into Sicily. But most of our grapes are actually grown on the Texas High Plains. That's this green area on the upper left, up around Lubbock. And it's high, it's dry, it's got great soil. So it's a natural place to grow things, and particularly grapes. The other thing is that, there's widely varying growing conditions in the state, just like in Burgundy, Bordeaux, Rhone, Alsace, all these other places in France. So it's very difficult to say, what grape is going to be the right grape for Texas. Well, if you can tell me what's the one right grape for France, you're a better wine person than I am, basically. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you maybe to close your eyes for a moment. We're going to talk about the Genesis moment for Texas wine. And, when I've done this live, I've asked people to throw out numbers, and they say, well, 1970, some people say 1880, some people say 1660. But I said, no, close your eyes and imagine ancient times, prehistory times. And that's where we're going to start this discussion today, because that's where what we have today in terms of a Texas wine region started. I'm going to take you back 120 million years ago. So if you can close your eyes and imagine, if you're anywhere in Texas, imagine what this place was like. Was it dusty? Did it have a lot of rain? Will we even be above water? That's the question you have to ask. because 120 million years ago, it was a very warm period of global warming. There were no ice caps. There was a lot of water. And if you see in the upper left-hand side here, there was an inland sea that went up from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into northern Canada. And this was a time when there were all sorts of calcareous creatures. That's creatures which have, pardon me, bones and shells and things, and they gathered over time on the bottom of this inland sea. And this brought on the formation of what we have limestone here, which is very special in wine growing. If you look to Europe, go just a little more to the right-hand side of that picture, you'll hit Europe. And there's a lot of that blue-green, dark blue-green area there too. And there was limestone being formed there. Now, if I take your eyes back left, all the way to the edge of North America, there really wasn't sea over there. It was volcanoes. So a completely different environment on the West Coast where most of our wines we're familiar with are made. Also during this time, there was a lot of deposition also of sandstone that was eroded from even more ancient times, maybe a couple 100 million years further back. And then we started something different. This is the next period. So the first one is there's deposition. The second thing we've got is it's going to form and be aggregated, I should say, and forms the limestone that we just talked about. And again, the result here is we have pretty much some of the world's finest soils are made from this type of Genesis moment. We have those in France. We have some in Spain. We have in Australia and Texas. You notice that the region I've selected in Australia is called the Coonawarra. And it's what actually gave me the name Doc Russ Texas Wine Slinger, because when I first started writing about this, I had just been to the high plains and seen the soil like we have on the upper right. And it's basically red sandy loam over porous caliche limestone. And I had just read about the Coonawarra, and it basically has a very similar structure. And then they brag about the Cabernets and the Tempraneos they grow there, Syrah. And so I blogged about this on my Vintage Texas site. And literally the next day, a wine writer from Sydney, Australia, Philip White, blogged back at me half the world away. And he told me I had a bad case of Coonawarra envy, for one. But secondly, he finished the blog by calling me Doc Russ, Texas Wine Slinger. Evidently, he had done a little research and knew I had a PhD. And that name has followed me. I didn't invent it myself. But again, if you look at what we've got here is red sandy loam over porous caliche limestone. There's a lot of winemakers or grape growers all over the world that would just love to have that kind of soil. So it's natural that it would be a place to grow grapes. We also have more prehistory as we approach the time when Europeans came. We know grapes were plentiful, both from the standpoint of the fact that archaeological evidence shows that Native Americans harvested it. They used it as a food source. They dry them and make raisins. They would also use the grapes to make red and blue and purple dyes that they would use in their makeup or their ceremonies. We don't have any evidence that they made wine. Now, we know that by the time the Europeans got here, that there were a lot of native grapes all over the U.S. But one of the major things is that there are 6 species which are native to North American grapes. This results in about 100 different varieties of native grapes. However, none of those are historically used to make wine, not in Europe, because Europe, they only have one variety. I shouldn't say variety, I should say species. and it's called Vitis vinifera. Those are the winemaking grapes of Europe. No matter whether it's Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay, they're all from the same genus, Vitis vinifera. But because of the diversity we have here, we have more varieties of Native American grapes than any other state. Partly we're so big, and partly we have such varied environments. Those of you, I saw there were some master naturalists on here. You understand about the diversity of Texas and the bioregions and that kind of stuff. So it's not surprisingly that we should have a lot of grapes in different varieties. However, they're not historically used to make wine because they have different aromas and flavors than people are used to drinking European vinifera wines. Let's now talk about the first taste of wine in Texas. This is like a second Genesis moment to me. And we owe this to the Spanish missionaries. They trudged their way up through Mexico, central Mexico, into northern Mexico, and into the borderlands along the Rio Grande. And where they chose to stop it was called El Paso del Norte. They actually constructed the mission in what's now called Juarez. You can see in this picture here, this is probably the second or third time it's been rebuilt. And this is the new church on the right. But they established their community, they established their church just on the south side of the Rio Grande. And then they chose the north shore, the north bank, I should say, of the Rio Grande, is where they planted what has become known as mission grapes. This is around where we know El Paso and some of the other cities on the north side of the Rio Grande. But we owe this special thing to a particular person. Friar Garcia de San Francisco. There's actually a statue of him. Let's see, there he is, he vanished, in downtown El Paso, because he came to the New World. He wasn't even a friar yet, but he was more or less a guy who made things happen. He, helped the people traverse. He would do the planning, and he would also do construction or supervise construction. But he also knew how to grow grapes. So when they got here, he planted the vineyard. He also then became a friar as well. He was ordained in the New World. I don't know if he was the first, but I know that's where it all happened. And he's credited with planting and tending the vineyards and making the wine for the sacraments. So anyway, basically, what grape? Where was it from? We colloquially talk about it as the mission grape, but that's not its real name. The grape was eventually, I think back in the early 1990s, was DNA matched to a grape that was brought from Spain to Argentina in the 1500s. And its name, it was called Criolla. Now we find several in South America, countries in South America call it País. And again, it traveled up through South America, and eventually with this Spanish missionaries made its way up to Texas. And if you really want to light up your California wine friends a little bit, you can tell a very important fact is that this mission grape was planted in Texas missions 100 years before it was planted in California. So our wine culture predates theirs by about 100 years. Now, anyway, I'll just leave that one with you. I don't know if you want to use it, but it's a good factoid to have in your back pocket if somebody starts to diss Texas wine. The one thing I do want to clarify, because a lot of people I've talked to think that the hybrid grape we have here in the state called Black Spanish was the mission grape. And I think the confusing point here is Black Spanish, Spanish missionaries, but this was not the grape. This didn't get here till about the 1830s. And the missions were gone by then. And so the interesting thing is these mission wineries, they also made other products out of the wine. They were secularized by the Mexican government in the early 1800s because they were a possible source of taxes and revenue for the Mexican government. And from there on, it became a commercial enterprise. And in my research in El Paso, I was able to find a copy of a picture postcard that shows the vineyards around El Paso, at least in the 1880s. And you can see they look like little bushes. There aren't trellises. This is the style they grew grapes in back in Europe, particularly Spain, southern France, parts of Italy. They didn't use trellises. And it became a large commercial industry, and it lasted for about 150 years. And I've seen travel journals and records where they point out the fact that over this the industry was active enough that it was able to produce in some of its best years over 250,000 gallons of wine per year, and this is a substantial industry. And so, particularly on the pioneering edge of what was Texas back in the 1800s. Now, the question I usually get is, why did it end? Why isn't it there today? Well, there were many potential reasons, but really not one that people have evidence to say this was the showstopper. And we do know, though, by the late 1800s, there were floods. There were actually two floods that changed the course of the river. So there was a lot of damage and international borders changed. There could have been grape diseases. We know that Texas, along with most southern states, is not the most hospitable place to grow grapes from a disease standpoint. There were also land, water, and border disputes going on this time, political conflicts, and most of all, the coming of prohibition. Most people, put the stake in the ground for 1920 as being the start of prohibition in America. But you probably don't know that well before that, many areas of Texas, the alcohol production and sale of alcohol, consumption of alcohol was also prohibited before it became national. So there's a lot of good reasons why things stopped, unfortunately, because it was a thriving industry. But wait, there's more. Time moves forward. Now we've got more wine culture coming to Texas. And it all started with our good friend and land impresario, Stephen F. Austin. He made promotional brochures and he sent them to Europe because he wanted people to populate the area that he was trying to promote. And what he said was, nature seems to have invented Texas for a vineyard to supply America with wine. I'll tell you, I think Stephen F. Austin was a very insightful person. He kind of realized, from his wanderings around the state, that we had so many grapes of different types growing in various places, on the high ground, in the low ground, on fences, on rocks. And he knew that in Europe, wine was a culture, was part of the day-to-day life. And so he made sure in his brochure that he had this line because it was the hook that brought a lot of people from Europe to Texas. The Italians, the Germans, and the French were on that, hook because some of the earliest settlers we have, particularly the Germans and the Italians, some French, are the people who tried to bring their vine stock with them. Unfortunately, we have diseases here that can attack the European vinifera grapes, and they died. And then what happened is many started to harvest wild grapes. of which we have a lot. And later, they grew hybrid grapes like Black Spanish and Herbamont, things that were a little more palatable than, say, Mustang grape wine. I heard a story that said the old timers used to call it cutthroat wine because it has so much acid in it. It's just the only way you can ameliorate it is by using a time-tested recipe, and that's to put sugar, and more sugar into the wine to cut the acid. And best estimates I can find, this comes from multiple sources, that in Texas, we had about 30 wineries, and I use that number kind of loosely, but that's the numbers I've been able to dig up. And that's a pretty significant number. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The picture on the right, I want to emphasize for you is, this is a picture from 1890. This is John Berger's winery near Columbus, Texas. Today you may not think of Columbus, Texas as being in the middle of wine country, but back in the 1800s, there were multiple 20+ acre vineyards between Sealy and Schulenburg. So it really was a major wine producing region. And what's nice to see is it's coming back, because we've had many new wineries establish themselves in there, particularly with new growing techniques and new varieties. So it's been nice to see that, particularly so close to me, because I'm in Houston and I don't have to go very far. We also know that some of these Germans, their main destination was not Houston. They came in through Galveston, came across on the ferry to Houston, and trudged on carts and horses out towards Sealy, Columbus, Schulenburg, New Braunfels, and eventually their goal was to get to Fredericksburg. And what we've got here is another wine culture came and established itself, the German wine culture. And like I said, it's been written many times, and if you just talk to them, you'll know it's a staple of daily life. I just looked over here and I saw Tom Briscoe in his he's drinking wine. I like that. Very good. Good going, Tom. But anyway, I was at the Pioneer Museum in Fredericksburg, and I was leafing through a lot of old stuff, and I found Louise Muisbach. It's a hard word for me to say. And she was the daughter of Baron von Muisbach, who was the guy, the land impresario, I guess you'd call it, the one who started Fredericksburg. She actually lived a little north in a little community called Cherry Hill. And I was going through her journal, and in 1875, she wrote, "We made wine from wild grapes gathered in great wagons, crushed and fermented after sugar was added." And, to me, this tells me they were making Mustang wine, because Mustang is very low sugar, very high acid, and you got to have sugar to make this thing happen. I also was able in the museum find a picture of the Lorenzo family and their friends. They were obviously picking grapes as well. And they were harvesting grapes in Fredericksburg in the 1890s. So we have evidence that we've had, the conditions for Texas wine industry were set up a million years ago. Culture started in the 1660s, was renewed with European influence in the 1850s to 1880s, and it evolved over time. Now, this is a rock star in my book in the early Texas wine industry. His name is Francesco Quaglia, with a G. And he was an immigrant from Italy that came into, just checking my time, into Mexico. He was an agriculturalist and came on a mission from Italy to help them improve their agricultural growing additions. but he didn't like the conditions down there. He wasn't treated very well. His compatriots weren't treated very well, so he decided to come back up to the U.S. And he came back to Houston or Galveston and ended up going out on the train to Del Rio, where there was a group of Italian workers living there. And in 1883, Francesco started the Valverde Winery in Del Rio, Texas. And this is our oldest winery. I think it's the fifth longest standing winery in North America. So it's really a very special thing. And it even operated during, it even survived Prohibition and a second low period that occurred primarily because all the dry areas in Texas in the 1950s. And how did he do that? Well, they sold grapes. They were able to sell grapes, put them on the train going back to Houston, and people were still allowed to make wine for their own consumption. And they also grew row crops. They were innovative. They planted the region between the rows of grapes with various row crops, cotton, soybeans, some raised cotton. They also raised cattle. They were on the border. They ran cattle back and forth between Mexico and U.S. across the Rio Grande. And they were able to legally sell religious and medicinal wines. So if you could get your local priest or religious representative to sign you up for some religious wine to take communion, or if your doctor would give you a prescription, you could actually buy wine. And the Qualia showed me some of the prescriptions they have on file. They had to keep them there for legal purposes. And so, yeah, it's really interesting because this is the one tried and true, the family that has carried us through from our early days to our modern days, because now Valverde Winery is a fourth generation Texas winery. And the daughter, Maureen Qualia, she's an instructor of enology or winemaking at Texas A&M, Texas Tech, their education center they have in Fredericksburg. Now, this is a question I like to ask people. Do cowboys drink whiskey, wine, or brandy? And most everyone comes back and says, whiskey. Of course they drink whiskey. That's what we see on the cowboy movies, right? Well, I'll tell you, what surprised me was I was able to find many references to something a little bit different. I reference back to the El Paso wineries, and there were even local family farms in the Fredericksburg area that harvested grapes, they made wine, and they even distilled brandy. And what did they do is, through the 1880s, brandy was sold to saloons in Texas town and cities like San Antonio. I've yet to see a cowboy movie where he comes in all dusty from the range and orders a glass of brandy, but it was probably more likely than not. And they probably just sold it as whiskey anyway. So, but anyway, that's another good factoid that you can stump your friends with. Now we have another rock star. This is probably the ultimate rock star, because there was a Texan who saved the French wine industry, and in doing so, saved the entire global wine industry at that time. And how? Well, does this picture help you out a little bit? You recognize this guy? His picture's not on money, and you don't even see it hardly anywhere unless you were really looking his bio up on Google. But this is Thomas Volney Munson. We a lot of times just refer to him as TV Munson. He was a great horticulturalist and hybridizer. He moved to Texas to be with his brothers and lived in Denison on the Red River. or close to the Red River. Reportedly, he traveled more than 10,000 miles in Texas by horse, by train, by whatever method he could back in the 1880s uh, to find Texas grapes. And through the varieties that he found, he created over 300 hybrids of grapes. Matter of fact, a friend of mine up at Grayson College, not too far away from where he lives, says Munson's ability to hybridize grapes surpassed his ability to come up with good names for the varieties, because he has all sorts of crazy names for the stuff he made, like Ben-Hur, Delicatessen. I think he even named one after his wife, Mrs. Munson. So, but you know, his real claim to fame is he found a compatible rootstock from native Texas grapes to send to France to fight off what is known as the phylloxera disaster. And eventually, uh, uh, this disaster destroyed anywhere from 60 to 90%, the estimates, of European vines. It goes down as one of the largest agricultural disasters in human history. Well, what's a phylloxera? Well, see those little guys crawling around and munching on, well, what they're munching on is a root of a European grape variety. It's kind of interesting, American grapes have very tough and chemically resistant roots. European grapes don't have that because they didn't grow up with a disease like this. The thing that's interesting is this was a problem in Europe, but it was caused by the phylloxera root louse that was transported to Europe on a lot of agricultural material that was brought back. You know, back in the 1800s, everybody in Europe wanted some plant from the New World to put in their garden. And eventually, you know, since phylloxera just seemed to love grapevine roots, European grapevine roots, they made their way very quickly, over a matter of about 5 to 10 years, covered the whole European continent in terms of causing devastation. Well, the thing is, it was common knowledge that, you know, among horticulturalists that, you know, the grapevine rootstock was resistant to phylloxera, but it was unsuccessful in solving their problem. Munson realized something different. He had the knowledge that we talked about earlier, going back 120 million years ago, that Munson realized that the French chalky soils were a good match for the soils in central Texas. And he had his favorite that could survive that. It was called Vitis berlandiaria. It's a native grape out of Texas. And still to this day, it and a few others from Texas are still bred into rootstocks that are used worldwide to solve this problem. For this, he was given a medal. You know, Europeans like to give medals or a uniform. And he was awarded, this French Legion of Honor medal for agriculture, which is ranked as the France's highest civilian award. And literally the rest is history. You know, this technology permeated the global wine industry, and it's why we have a wine industry today. Whether you're drinking Australian wine or French wine or California wine, it's because of Texas rootstocks that are our native grapes. There's a little bit of DNA of Texas in every rootstock, just about. Now, you know, the other thing I said, we had prohibition going on, and it was, you know, it was a rough time. I mean, it was between, you know, 1920 and 1936. And, you know, Texas wineries almost went extinct. Now, I crawled through not crawled through, but I weeded my way through the online archives of Cornell University. I was able to find, for almost all the years, a record of the federal licenses or records of Texas wineries. And as you can see here it started after Prohibition, so 1937, there were about 15 wineries. And, I explained a little while ago that, pre-Prohibition, we had about 30 wineries. That's the best estimates I've been able to find. But look what happened after Prohibition. We've got declining numbers of wineries. And the best evidence I've found is this was because of two things. One is the myriad, or the patchwork, I should say, of wet dry areas. It was very difficult to distribute or sell or drink many alcoholic beverages in Texas. And the second thing I've been related to me by another family that almost made it through the 1950s is that it wasn't easy to have a license. You couldn't just, put your check in a form that you downloaded on the internet in a Federal Express pouch, or go to their website and fill it in and put your credit card number in. You had to physically go to Austin, by wagon or by horseback or by your Model T Ford, and you had to do it live, which was a burden. And most of these were started by people who had wineries before. They were elderly people. They opted, unless they had relatives, younger relatives to take it over, they opted not to continue. And so it really wasn't until the mid 70s where things started to turn around. How come that's not staying? Okay, there we go. Yeah, something happened in the mid 1970s. It's called the Judgment of Paris. And some of you may know this if you've seen the movie Bottle Shock, or if you haven't, you might want to see that because it tells the story a little bit glamorized for Hollywood, but it's very factual. And this is where the California wineries beat out the finest French chateau of Bordeaux and wineries of Burgundy, both of them, as the wines were judged by the French. They were tasted blind, and there was only one person from the press. His name was George Tabor from one of our weekly news magazines, and he covered it, and the story went around the world. And it really made a name for local wines out of various states in Texas, particularly California. We'll raise the flag there because that's when in Texas, like other states, many people said, maybe not exactly, but I said, if they can do it in California, we can do it here too. And again, this is where many states started their internal wine industries. This is how it started in Washington and in New York, in Oregon, Texas too. And this is where we get the modern wine industry starting up. And we have some people to thank for this. And, it really kind of came out of the university environment. There was a gentleman called Clinton Doc McPherson. If you're familiar with the McPherson name, his son is making wine in Lubbock now. But he was a chemistry professor. He was also a bombardier, I should say, in planes that flew over Europe during World War II, PhD chemist. And as he relates it himself, he says, one day the president of Texas Tech University made the rounds to all the professors and said, y'all have to start doing research. And I can give you my best impression of him. He said, research? What are we going to do research on? Well, he gathered a few of his cronies that night, and they came back the next morning and says, we're going to do research on wine. So that's how it all started. Matter of fact, this gentleman in the back here, Dr. Roy Mitchell, he made some of the first modern Texas wines in the basement of the chemistry building at Texas Tech University in Lubbock. Now, I'll just tell you on the side, it was bootleg because they didn't have a license to produce alcoholic beverage in the basement of the chemistry building. But that's where it all started in the mid 70s. In the mid 80s, this upper right picture, Charles McKinney and Roy Mitchell really did a lot of the groundwork for the large UT Land St. Genevieve winery project that was in Fort Stockton. They were researching what types of grapes to plant. And what they did was they joint ventured with the French winery, and they planted nearly 1,000 acres of grapes. To me, this is a major step out because there weren't probably 500 acres of grapes planted in the whole state before this happened. So it was kind of a sight unseen step out moment. And a lot of these grapes have been used by other wineries in the more recent past. But the St. Genevieve project started in the mid 1980s. And then around that same time, Fall Creek Vineyards in the Hill Country started up. And so, it's really interesting to see this momentum gathering. Now, if we want to, we thank people who took it from the 1980s to now. We really have to this is just a fraction of them. And, I've numbered them here. You can see there's Doc and Kim McPherson. And people call Doc the father of the Texas wine industry. Number 2 there is Ed and Susan Uller at Fall Creek Vineyards in the Hill Country. They really established the Hill Country. They actually filed the petition for the Hill Country ABA. And we have, Paul and Merrill Bonarigo, who are the personification of marketing Texas wines. And so they would go anywhere, do anything to heighten the awareness of Texas wines. We have number 4, which is Dr. Richard and Bunny Becker. They created, a quality winery to this day on the Texas wine trail. They didn't know it was a wine trail back then, but it was the 290 stretch between Johnson City and Fredericksburg. I'm going to zip you down to the number 9 because that's related. Most people don't recognize this fellow, and I try to elevate him because he was a visionary. We talked about Missionaries, the Visionaries. This is Ned Symes. He was the original owner of Grape Creek. And he and Gary Gilstrap envisioned the first wine trail. He said, all these people driving down 290, every one of those is a potential sale. And so he basically created what we call now wine tourism and created the first wine trail that people could visit along 290. Let's jump back up to number 5. These 2 guys, these rascals, I call them. On the left there is Raymond Hack, and on the right is Jerry Watson. Between the 2 of them, over about a 20-year period, they created the Blanc du Bois that we have in the bottle today. They learned how to grow it, harvest it right, how to process it in a winery, what yeast to use. And we have very palatable Blanc du Bois that are comparable to European vinifera, even though they're hybrids. Down to number 6, this is one of our giant legends, like the Paul Bunyan of the High Plains. It's Bobby Cox. He started his winery, won some of the first medals, out-of-state medals for the wines back in the early 90s. Unfortunately, he lost his winery to the bank, financial problems, but he became one of the most influential viticultural consultants we had on the High Plains. Right next to him at number 7 is Neil Newsom. He and his wife Janice and his son Nolan really planted some of the first vinifera on the High Plains. Cabernet, he knew it was a low yield, high profit grape. So he and his father said, we're going to plant 3 acres of it. Never did it before. And now they have about 150 acres. Next to them are we'll call them William and Chris. It's Chris Brundett and Bill Blackman. They started the William Chris Vineyards there in High. And again, we have so many more than I could name here, but I want to make sure we acknowledge at least some of the ones that you might have a chance to see. Some are past, some are passing. So, my goodness, get out to the wineries and meet some of these people while you still can. Well, thing is, though, Texas, I used the saying once, and people have pushed it back at me sometimes, but it says, Texas isn't Bordeaux, and it sure as hell ain't Burgundy. And most of the wines Americans know commonly were taught to us by Californians. And they were based on Northern European grape varieties that grew under cool weather conditions. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir. These are what common names you'll find at your grocery store or specs, or wine markets. And it's what names roll off the tongue of most wine drinkers in the United States. It's expanded a little bit, but you got to remember, this was back in the 1970s and early 80s. And if it wasn't French or German, most people didn't know anything about it. When we started our wine industry here in the 70s, they hired consultants from California, and they said, you can grow anything you want, but unless you grow Chardonnay, Cabernet, Merlot, and Pinot, nobody's going to buy it. So I think, that's how the industry started. That's phase one. Well, we realized about in the 1990s that we really weren't Northern European climated. So they started to step out and jump into things that were more Southern European. For white grapes, we have Viognier, Roussanne, Marsanne from southern France. Muscat is the Mediterranean. It's everywhere. It's like weeds. They're everywhere. And good stuff, but it grows like weeds. Vermentino, also known as Roll. This is from Italy, Sardinia, and southern France. Trebbiano, you may have heard of. Uni Blanc, it's also known in France. And we have our favorite hybrid grape, French-American hybrid, is called Blanc du Bois, which is a combination of things like Muscat and other European grapes, Semillon particularly, mixed in with a variety of American grapes. And it has very palatable wine now. In terms of red grapes, Tempranillo is probably known best as the national grape of Texas currently. We have a variety of other things from southern France, such as and Spain. We have, Cinsault, Syrah, Carignan, Mourvèdre, Tannat. We also have Sangiovese, Montepulciano, Aglianico, Touriga Nacional from Portugal. We also have a black Spanish grape, also known as Lenoir or Jacquet or Jaquez. And it's mostly used for dessert style wines like port or Madeira. And so, we have a whole nother lexicon here. And you might say, well, here we have in California, we've had these 4 or 5 grapes. Well, it wasn't always like that. When they started out, they were growing all sorts of things. When I first went out there in 1980, I could get several wineries to pour me a Gewürztraminer or a Riesling or a Chenin Blanc. But now you almost can't find that. They've narrowed it down to 5 different varieties that they bank on. Well, we're in that 1980s period like California was. We are still experimenting with a lot of different grape varieties. And we're going to see over the next 5, 10, 15 years, which ones rise to the top. They can withstand our environment, which is a little more hostile than certain places in California or France. But then, it's just part of what we are. And I've coined a phrase, I think one of the first articles I wrote back in the late 90s about Texas wines, I used the term Texas is the Mediterranean of the USA. I think it is. It's a warm weather growing region. We're the fifth largest. Of the top five, we're the only one that's basing our industry on a more Mediterranean or warm weather climated grape. So it's kind of interesting to see how this all happens here. So I've kind of tried to summarize this a little bit. What are the takeaway messages that I'd like you to kind of, keep on the tip of your tongue, if you don't mind the pun? First is that, Texas has one of the oldest wine cultures in the United States, and it has one of the oldest wineries in North America, continuously operating winery in North America. Texas is, it varies a little bit from year to year, but it's basically the fifth largest wine producing state. They're pushing on number 4, Oregon, right now. We can have a couple good years. And we're seventh in grape production. And that says we have a deficit of grapes. So you may find some Texas wineries out there that are making wine without Texas fruit. Unfortunate, but it's easier to start a winery and faster to start a winery than it is to get a productive vineyard in any state or region. So we're playing catch up, but we're doing much better right now. We have darn near 10,000 acres of grapes now, and it's going up fast because we're learning what grapes will survive. We're not losing as much to disease and the finicky weather. So we're headed in the right direction now. We're hitting the hockey stick, the upper part of the hockey stick. The interesting thing that most people don't realize that's pretty darn amazing is Texas is tied for number 2 with Washington State for wine tourism revenues. This is an interesting question. Why that we're number 5, we have more tourism dollars spent on wine? Well, first of all, we don't distribute much outside the state. I kind of say we follow the Blue Bell model. We drink all we can and we sell what's left. And so I think, that's one of the reasons if people want to experience our wine, they have to come here. Secondly, we're more centrally located to all travel destinations in the US and abroad than Washington is. And we also have our wine regions in the state close to relatively large urban centers. Now, this is a number that you're going to question my sanity for putting up here, but it's best as I can research it. It's true. I'm pretty factually know that the economic impact of the Texas wine industry to Texas and Texans is $21 billion with a B. And I have worked for the last year and a half to get a number on the cotton industry here. Because everybody says cotton is king in Texas. And it is, because it donates to the legislature. It gets laws drafted, good ones and bad ones. And the best number I can come up with is $24 billion for the cotton industry. It's much more distributed in smaller pieces, so it takes in more people. But the reason why the number for Texas wine is so high is because it's more heavily taxed. So it goes to pay for more things than cotton. And most of the cotton economic impact actually comes outside of the state because it's exported. So anyway, you can believe this or not. I've researched as hard as I could, and this is my answer, and it's a surprising one. Texas is the Mediterranean of the U.S. wine regions, and I really invite you all to discover your inner Mediterranean, or maybe your inner Roman. I'm not sure which way I should ask that, but or inner Spaniard. And go visit a Texas wine or buy a bottle of Texas wine at a store, liquor store, market. Just make sure it has Texas on the label in one way, shape, or form, either as a state appellation or as a region like Texas High Plains, Texas Hill Country. Then you're getting to Texas wines, because by law now, They have to be 100% Texas to be anything other than just Texas wine. Last but not least, and this is really important one because there wouldn't be a wine industry today if there wasn't T.B. Munson. You know, he came up with the solution, the practical solution, even when other people knew what the solution was. He didn't realize the geological history and the similarity between Texas and Europe. And I'll just leave you with one extra comment I couldn't squeeze on this slide, and that is that a lot of people ask me, basically, you know, what are Texas wines like? Are they like California or are they like Europe? Well, I tend to focus more on Europe than I do California because California is basically a volcanic area, has different soils. It makes a different style of wine completely. If you want to make a comparison, compare it to the wines of Europe. This is France, Spain, Italy, Sardinia. You know, this is where we really have that Mediterranean influence. So, you know, give it a try and find your favorite winery, find your favorite grape, and go off and visit something. I'm going to leave you there. I'm not going to leave you. I'm just going to shut up.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I feel a sense of renewed pride in our Texas wines because of this presentation. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Very welcome.
So we had only a couple of questions in the chat so far, but I suspect folks have more.
Get those questions out there.
Yeah, get those questions going on. So we'll ask these two, and then we'll see who else has a comment or a question that they want to share. We have a question from Joyce, and it was back when you were talking about the Germans coming in. And so her question was, what wine was predominant, red or white? And I think she was talking about that particular.
In warm regions, you often find that red grapes are sturdier. They tend to outproduce white wines. They tend to have thicker skins. They're not as affected so much by a disease. Maybe the exception to that might be Pinot Noir, which is kind of a wimpy grape that thinks it's red, but it's really white. So anyway, I would say, you know, the reds tend to predominate, and you know, the Germans didn't really like that. Matter of fact, they worked hard to try to find a hybrid white grape that would, or a white wine producing grape that would survive here. And they finally found one, although it didn't have a white skin or green skin. It had red skin, but it bled white, and that was Herbemont. So it was much more difficult to get the white wine they wanted. Now, more recently, we have Blanc du Bois, which is just an incredible hybrid grape that grows on the Gulf Coast, East Texas, Hill Country, wherever you want to grow it.
All right, thank you so much. And I saw a couple comments about that as you were talking, so I'll get to those in a little bit. So Ninsa's asking, what wines that are labeled from the Hill Country, where do those grapes come from?
Well, if the wines are from the Hill Country, if what's on the bottle is the origin of the wine. The European term is appellation of origin. And so you may have a Texas Hill Country winery making a wine with on the label, it says Texas High Plains. Now, about another factoid that I didn't put in here, I probably should have, is about 70+% of the grapes produced in the whole state are produced in the high plains around the Lubbock, Brownfield, Terry County area. And so, you know, you could have a winery in the Hill Country making and labeling a Texas High Plains wine.
That's interesting. Okay, Stephen is asking, is the real heritage of Black Spanish grape known? What's it a hybrid of?
Well, it's an interesting story, and we're only finding out more of it recently with all this DNA work. And as it turns out, we've learned that it's a Native American grape We're still pushing around. It's got several native grapes in its lineage. The vinifera that it's crossed with is something that the Huguenots brought to the East Coast, and that's Cabernet Franc. So, the best analysis of the DNA that I've seen just within the last couple of years has been it's got Vitis Belandieri, our good friend. It's got a couple more lesser native grapes, and then the vinifera component comes from the Cabernet Franc. No, I didn't complete the story. I didn't say how it got here. You know, it because of its native component, it does well in warmer regions where we have the diseases that vinifera can't tolerate. So it made its way across the Gulf Coast, and I've traced it all the way down into Spain and into Peru. Now, the other thing is during the phylloxera problems of Europe, it got imported back to Europe and made it all the way down to the Canary Islands. So it's got a global reach, and the funny part is the guy doing the DNA work on it is located in South Africa. So I don't know how he gets plugged into this thing, but it's a fascinating story. Matter of fact, right now I'm co-authoring a book with Fran Pontash, who was with Texas AgriLife. This is really her book. I'm doing what I call color commentary. I'm writing the stories about people and places and doing a little bit of work on the lineage. But this is going to be a book on the Blanc du Bois grape. We're hoping that this treatise will really help people take that grape more seriously. I talked to her today. She says, people are already telling me we ought to be doing a book on Black Spanish too. So I have a feeling that's going to be coming down the road shortly after.
I love it.
We're hoping to get the Blanc du Bois book and out by the end of next year.
So Russell does have a blog. So I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagine you might talk about that on your blog when you get to that point. So
we always like to talk about things grape oriented. We just had a nice blind tasting of sparkling wines from Texas and sparkling wines from around the world, like 6 other areas around the world. And the judges were top-notch judges, but they were blinded to the grapes. So I'm just writing that up for the blog. Hopefully by next week, I can get that one to go live.
and I will include his a link to his blog whenever I send out my follow-up email tomorrow. So you folks that are wondering what is the blog, how do I find it, just stay tuned for my email and you'll have all those resources. All right, we've got a couple more questions. Maria's asking, and I hope I don't butcher the name of this grape, is the Herbamont grape grown in Europe?
I've not seen it in Europe. I've seen it grown in the Midwest, and where I think we got ours in Texas from is, the Germans here in that area around Sealy to Columbus, they had correspondence with German vintners in Anaheim, California. And John Berger made a trip out there, and then he started growing Herbamont. So I think he got clued on to Herbamont from his brethren, German vintners in Anaheim. So I've not seen any references to it grown in Europe. One of the interesting side notes of that question is it's actually illegal in the EU to grow and make wine out of hybrid grapes.
Fascinating.
It's just there's people working around the fringes to change that because they think with climate change and other things like that, some of these hybrid grapes are actually going to be better to produce, hardier, require less chemicals than some of the vinifera that have been grown for ages.
Yeah, I can see that.
So yeah.
Joyce is asking, what is the most produced wine in Texas?
Okay, that's a good question. It's going to surprise you, my answer. We have on the red side, I would guess if you count primarily, the high plains where most of it's grown, and the hill country, it's going to be Tempranillo on the reds. You know, like I said, I jokingly call it the national grape of red grape of Texas. On the white side, the answer is really interesting. It's Blanc du Bois. It's the hybrid. There's more acres of Blanc du Bois planted than any other white grape, more than Viognier, more than Roussanne, Chenin Blanc, anything out there, even Muscat. So it's a surprising answer, and it's one of the reasons why Fran and I are putting the effort on this book, because it's got so much more room to be grown than any of the vinifera white grapes that I think it could really lead Texas wine in the future and increase the kind of or the amount of white wine we can make here.
That was a surprising answer. I'm
Yeah,
gonna need to I'm gonna need to go and
gotta
try some
find some
more.
good Blanc du Bois. You know, Threshold Vineyards, Hack Vineyards are two that come off the top of my head. Also, Keepersall, if you're in the eastern side of the state, you know, it's really worth. Also, it's even made its way in the hill country. Both Doug Lewis at Lewis Wines and William Chris make a sparkling Blanc du Bois. Can I ask myself a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to ask myself a question. Russ, what happens because we're at a deficit of white grapes and we have all these red grapes? What's a way to solve that problem? Well, what you do is you make rosé, dry rosé. You use you do exactly what they do in southern France, Europe, and Italy. They take their plethora of red grapes, they harvest them early, so they have a lot of acid, like white wines do. They barely press them, so they don't get a lot of color from the skins, and they make rosé, dry rosé wines. Very refreshing, very compatible with our cuisine. And you know, if you ever go to Nice, look around what people are drinking in the cafes. It's rosé. Okay,
Love that.
I ask myself any more
It
questions.
it's very popular among my friend group, Rosé. So
Oh,
thank you. I everyone who's putting their comments into the chat, I am getting to them. Thank you. I'm seeing them. Russ, I wanted to let you know that there is a lot of compliments in the chat for your
oh,
presentation,
well, I'm
and
glad.
folks just saying it's so interesting and they're so glad that they tuned in. So
Well, you know what I didn't get to my shameless self-promotion slide, did I?
I don't think so, but please feel free.
Okay, let me put it up here. Let's see. Let's just put that up straight away there. Share. Okay. Not giving you the big picture, but it's
There we go.
maybe it'll go big. Just a second here. Let's see. Yeah.
And while you're working on that, let me just say to everyone, we will be including not exactly this PowerPoint, but basically this PowerPoint turned into a PDF in the email that I'm sending out tomorrow. So Mary, I see in the chat that you were asking for a copy of this. So you'll have one. It'll be a slightly different format, but it'll be the same information. And I will also include links to the books and then these two websites in my email as well. So hopefully that'll make it easy for everybody.
Yep. Yeah. And what I got here is just, like I said, you can buy the books on Amazon, but if you want a personalized signed copy, you can get those off of my website at vintagetexas.com. We'll actually mail them to you. And then, you know, last but not least, I'm particularly proud of the Special of Texas Wine classes that I've put together for the Texas Wine School. And the reason why I say that is when the previous owner of the wine school and I got together back in about 2014 to think about this class, I put together a bunch of slides, and James King was his name, and we publicized it, and we got 2 people to sign up. And you know, we were almost flabbergasted that nobody would want to do this. But within the next season, we had 6 people, and the next year we had 12 people. And now typically our classes are anywhere from 15 to 30 people. And we do them both on Zoom and we do them live. And so the Zoom ones are nice because we get people who have become certified. This is a certification class. You take an exam if you want, and then you can get your nice pin. And we've certified people as Texas wine specialists in Colorado, Louisiana, and even California. So there.
In a twist of fate.
Definitely.
All right, thank you so much. And I hope folks will definitely check out those websites and check out the class. It sounds very cool. I think we've got time for maybe three more questions. If we don't get to your question tonight, maybe reach out to Dr. Kane through his website and see if you can connect and get some more answers that way. I apologize that we're not going to have time to talk about this all night because I feel like we could.
Yeah. I saw a question back back a ways that we talked about Blanc de Soleil.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you asked that question because it's kind of the second generation French American white hybrid. It's kind of they took Blanc de Bois and crossed it with another grape, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head because I just tasted it for the first time last year. But yeah, it's kind of like a second generation, a little more neutral than Blanc de Bois. It makes a great blender. And if you like things like Chenin Blanc, it should be your grape.
That's great. Okay, I'm gonna try to get to Dawn's question, Mary's question, and Dia's question before 7:30. Let's see if we make it. So Dawn's question was, what makes an AVA designation important?
It has different meanings to different people. I think, the one that is the esoteric answer is that it gives you a feel that you've described a region that makes a particular kind of wine or style of wine. And on one level, that's it. If you say Bordeaux or if you say hill country, you ought to be able to get your brain around, what kind of wine would come from that region. So it has to be typical of, the aspect of the land, the rainfall, the geology, the type of soil. That's the one reason to kind of characterize the wine. But particularly in America, I can't say that anymore because I think we market wine, globally now from all countries. It's important as much for name recognition in marketing as it is anything else nowadays. For example, in the hill country, we actually have three appellations, three AVAs. We have, the Texas Hill Country, we have Bell Mountain, which is a sub-AVA, and we have Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. That's a mouthful. But people generally tend to choose the Texas Hill Country AVA because there's more name recognition to it. Now, that may change because we're getting two more sub-AVAs. One is the Hickory Sand and the other is the Llano Uplift. And these are really going after some of the unique aspects that are in the hill country, particular soil types that make them able to make wines that are more in the style, say, of the West Coast, because they're volcanic, they're sandstone, versus the limestone soils that we have most everywhere else. So there's two answers to that question, but I think I've given you a view of what both of them are.
Thank you so much. I don't know, the next question could be controversial. What do you think of fruit flavored wines?
they're, they're there. I'm kind of a purist of one sector. If I'm drinking a sparkling wine, do I really want it to taste like almonds? There is several wineries are selling almond flavored sparkling wines, or some people make peach flavored Chardonnay. I'm not a fan, but again, I realize that, people who drink wine, I'm not going to be a snob. If that's what you like, you drink what you like. You don't drink what someone else tells you to drink. So they're there. They fill a niche, kind of like wine coolers did back in my early days. And so I'd say, hey, more the merrier.
All right. And one final question, and Dia had to hop off because she was having trouble with connections, but I thought maybe we would try to answer her question anyway, because I'm going to send her a recording of this. She's asking if in your research, did you find any evidence that Black Texans were involved with the wine industry? Just sort of curious about that cultural component.
Yes, yes, actually, um, I had one African American in the Gulf Coast area. You know, I saw some of the pictures that were at some of these wineries, like the Burger Winery and another one. And there were whites and blacks working shoulder to shoulder in the vineyards and riding on the wagons full of grapes. And I said, boy, I didn't expect that. And he told me that the Germans and the African Americans got got along better than they got along with other brands of white citizens. You know, they were kind of, you know, played a backseat role, the Germans, because they were different. They kept their language for a long time, and so that was the one answer to the question. Back in the old days, I was really surprised to see how much interaction there was between blacks and whites in the wine industry back then. The other thing is, right now we have several very good wineries that are headed by African Americans in Texas, and probably the premier one that I have to acknowledge is Alphonse Dotson, who used to be a football player for the Oakland football team. And after he retired, he got the urge to grow grapes because he remembers in the Houston, he was from Houston, and his grandfather taught him how to tend a grape arbor on their garage. And, you know, if you want to visit with Alphonse, he's in his tasting room up in Mason. And it's, you know, wines of Dotson and Cervantes. Cervantes is his wife's name. And they make some pretty darn good wine.
And Mason is beautiful country,
Oh,
so
yeah.
worth a
And
drive.
yeah, it's really where they're very proud of their wine culture up there. I kind of make the analogy, it's kind of like if you've been to California, the Russian River area. It's kind of, you know, hidden behind the picture of Napa Valley. You have a lot of I won't call them, you know, garagenistas, but they're smaller operations, family operations, personal operations, small production. Very nice wine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kane, Doc Weinslinger, Doc Weinslinger. Got to get your name right.
Whatever it is, yes.
I am so sorry, but we are up against the magic hour where we will turn into pumpkins if we keep going. But those of you who have asked about the PDF, yes, if you registered for tonight's event, so that means that you got the email from me yesterday and today with the link to the Zoom presentation. That's the email that I'll use to send out my email tomorrow with all the follow-up information, including the PDF. And let me just drop my email address into the chat, just in case something goes wrong and you don't get it or you want to get a hold of me. Texas.gov. There you go. Christy Peliquin at thc.texas.gov. And I think you can reach Dr. Kane through his website. Is that correct?
Yeah, it should be,
That
but it's basically russ@vintagetexas.com.
Russ at vintagetexas.com.
Yep.
Well, this has been an absolute honor, and I am, like I said, feeling much more pride and excitement about Texas wines than I have in a long time, and I'm sure that other folks in our audience are feeling that same way. And before you log off, Dr. Kane, take a scroll through the chat and see all the thank yous and appreciative comments.
Oh yeah, I was just doing that as you were talking, and it really it's my pleasure, my honor to be able to make this presentation to you. And like I said, just leave you with messages. The Texas wine industry is out there for you to enjoy. They're doing it for you. And these people are passionate. The growers are even more passionate because they put up with the funky Texas weather on good years and bad years and learning how to make this be part of your daily life. So, yeah, I really encourage you to get out and experience it. It's a lot easier to experience Texas wine country than to fly to California or Washington State or France to do it. You can get in a car and get there in 3 hours and drive home with a whole load of wine.
That's a good point. Yes, that's very true. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I invite you to follow the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. That's our organization on social media. That's where we will let you know about future virtual events. And hopefully someday we can have Dr. Kane back to give us an update on the Texas wine industry. So stay tuned. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care. Take care. Bye bye.